So, since the 1980s about, video games have become a huge part of American culture. They've been becoming more and more a part of the entertainment industry for a long time. Now, the problem is that a lot of parents actually think that video games are making their kids dumber. They think that they're like, okay, they look at these kids, have you ever seen a person play video games, just like, they have this weird look on their face, like they're not paying attention to anything. And then they also look at the game, especially games like Modern Warfare 3 and Battlefield 3, they look at it and they're like, good God, it's just killing people, it's desensitizing my kid to murder. So, what if I told you that video games are actually healthy for you? And that's my main claim, is that video games are a positive source of cognitive development. Or, to put it in layman terms, video games actually do make you smarter on the subconscious level. And I'm going to start myself off with, first of all, a specific claim about action video games, because those seem to be the games that are under attack the most often. And then I'm going to go ahead and broaden it out for you and tell you why all video games, and yes, that's right, all video games actually do teach real-world skills. So, let's jump right into this. First of all, I'm going to go with the University of Texas and the University of Alberta as my studies, because in the University of Texas, they did a study and they found that people who don't play video games and actually play action video games get increases in their focus and attention. And then, 2 years later, they took these same people who still haven't played video games afterwards, and they discovered that they retained these sources of attention, and they also cited another study in the University of Texas that was done a while ago where they brought them back 6 months later, and they'd also retained this sort of focus. And the thing is, you can go to class and learn stuff every day, but if it doesn't stick, then there's no point to it. But these kinds of focus and attention-getting skills actually do stick, as they discovered. And then we go up north to the University of Alberta, and they tested gamers, actual action gamers versus non-gamers, and they used this thing called the UFOV. Now that's the Useful Field of View test, and basically what it does is it tests things like your ability to center on things and also find things out in your periphery. And it's mainly used for drivers, to figure out if you can drive. But what they found is that action gamers are actually doing really well on these UFOV tests, and non-gamers aren't doing quite as well, although they're still passing them. And they discovered this is actually happening at a middle school level. It's not happening with adults like me and you who are, who've been driving for a long time. It's actually happening with little kids. So basically you can find that action gamers are a little bit better drivers than non-gamers. And they also found that, so that's basically why action games specifically are good at increasing your focus and attention skills and your spatial reasoning skills, and they make you better drivers, which is one reason for that. So let's broaden this out a little bit and go to all video games. So basically, they discovered two things with all video games, and that's that they develop the skill of inductive discovery, and that they teach you how to understand morality. And this is with kids, this isn't with adults, this is with kids playing video games. Now, a common concept is that kids are stupid, kids are ignorant. But the actual thing is that, if you're playing a video game that's super violent, you learn the morals of these video games. You learn that it's okay for me to kill this person. And when you play multiple video games, for instance, you play Fallout, when you steal from somebody, they're going to try and kill you to try to get their money back. Or if you play a game like Modern Warfare 3, it's okay for you to kill Al-Qaeda because they're the bad guys. But what you learn from taking all these moral lessons is that you actually understand the moral implications of your actions in real life. Now, it's not to say that you're going to take killing bad guys into real life. It's to say that since you understand the moral rules of several different concepts, you can better understand the moral rules of what's going on today. Now, to go back to inductive discovery, now that's just a fancy MIT term for the process behind scientific thinking. And basically, it's the guiding of rules, learning rules as they come at you. Before video games, when you want to play a game like backgammon, for instance, you can't just sit down with your friend who's never played backgammon before and say, okay, let's figure out how to play backgammon. No, you have to read a book, or you have to have someone who knows what's going on with backgammon. But in real life, that doesn't happen. I mean, you can go to class as much as you want to become a journalist, for instance. You can take communications class and stuff like that. But until you actually become a journalist and do journalist things and have someone teach you how to be a journalist and learn by experience, which is one of the major points of life, is learn by experience, then you're not going to know how to be a journalist. You can't just jump onto the news camera and be like, okay, so I'm reporting for CS25. It's not going to work like that. And that's what video games do. When you jump into a video game, any video game, there's always some sort of process of learning the rules of that video game. There are manuals with video games, but nobody really reads the manuals of video games to learn out how to play. They just jump in, and then they say, okay, well, I figured out that if I try to shoot this barrel while I'm standing next to it, I'm going to explode and die. Or I figured out that if I put this piece on top of this piece on top of this piece in Tetris, then I'll lose the game. So that's basically general sense, and I'll give you a couple more examples of video games here. First of all, real-time strategy games. The most well-known one would be Harpoon, because the U.S. Naval Military actually uses this game. Now, the U.S. Naval Military did not invent this game, but it's actually a public game. And what they did was they said, okay, well, this is actually pretty good in teaching naval tactics, so we're going to take this game and do it. And it's not to say that it's super realistic in any way, that examples of damage and things like that are grossly oversimplified. It's that it teaches you basic tactics. On the other side of things, Tetris has actually been shown by a professor of UCLA in psychology named Patricia Greenfield. She actually cited that Tetris is good at developing your mental spatial processing skills, which are good on nonverbal tests. And games like Tetris and other puzzle games are actually a reason that nonverbal tests or nonverbal IQ is actually rising in the United States. So, basically, what I'm saying is, if you want to be smarter, then you should play video games, because video games are a positive source of cognitive development.
All right, Ben, there's several things that I think are pretty solid in the speech. You have a very clearly stated proposition. I think that the visualization at the beginning gets people interested in the subject, and you've got a lot of energy while you're delivering the speech. Your presentation is solid for the most part. You keep your voice involved and active. You're looking at the audience for most of the time that you're speaking, so I think you're doing the right kind of thing there. I do think that you need to have a little bit better internal signposting. You do preview the secondary claims adequately, although the second one just seems like it's a broader generalization of the first one. And when you get to that first point, you just dive into it and start talking about your examples without reminding us of what that point was. I thought you did a nicer job signposting the second point when you got to it, so you want to be consistent on those kinds of things. The biggest issue that I have with the argument is the evidence. It often sounds like you are making reference to studies, but not presenting quotes from those studies. It sounds like you're paraphrasing and summarizing what you think the studies say, instead of giving us what the authors of those studies have concluded based on the research that they've done. For instance, you have the one study that you mentioned that even suggests that there may be just a minor difference between the two, and I'm going, well, why is that important then? Why are we making a judgment about this? It wasn't until maybe 2/3 of the way through the speech that you actually cited a particular piece of information from somebody who's done research on this, Greenfield, I think it is, or Greenberg from UCLA, and you mentioned that study. And then I thought I was actually getting a couple of quotes from the research that person did. Everything else just feels like a paraphrase. You explain the theories of these things pretty well. What I don't see is much demonstration or proof that those theories are valid or correct. Either statistical information from the studies that you make reference to, which I assume that's probably what they found in those studies, so you ought to be telling us what the statistical proof was for those particular claims, or some examples that you can illustrate. At best, we get some hypothetical examples. You mentioned, for instance, the one game, the strategy game, Harpoon, I guess it is, and you say it comes close to being, a good game for teaching these kinds of strategies. Well, if the Navy is using this, we ought to have some data that shows that people who are trained using this game pass the tests at a higher level, understand the material more, promote higher in the Navy, something like that tells us that this hasn't, in fact, had some kind of impact. All we've got is the fact that the Navy uses it so clearly it must have some impact, and I don't think that that's a fair inference to be making there. I thought you had a really good exit line for the speech also, though, so that leaves us with a strong impression at the end. All right, thank you.